evening all and welcome. I've scoured the depths of the internet to find the most horrific stories for your listening pleasure tonight. Be warned, break-ins are gonna get horrifying. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe and press the bell icon for more content every other night. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Check your security cameras and let the darkness take control. Before I get into this story, it's important for me to explain to you a few key details about my country, South Africa, in order for you to fully understand. Here it's normal to have high brick walls and electric gates, electric fences and alarms. The crime here is hectic. It's also pretty normal to have a big garden. My family and I are big animal lovers, and at the time we had 6 dogs, 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers and 2 Dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely in and out of the garden, as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's perfectly normal to have a live-in domestic worker or maid or gardener, like the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. So for context, our domestic worker is Ellie and her gardener is Vince. This story happened in 2007 when I was 9. My older brother of 10 and I had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprised us with them after work. You may think it's a bit young, but it was used for emergencies or to communicate with our parents, and it's an important part of the story. Now, we don't usually leave our veranda door open at night due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night, and of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room, setting up our new cell phones all excited. Ellie's daughter, Anne, who was like an older sister to us of 18, was helping my brother and I. My dad was somewhere in the house, and my mum was in the bath. I specifically remember Anne having a comment about how the dogs wouldn't shut up and how annoying it was. That's when I noticed it too. Sure, they bark, but it was usually the Dachshunds that yapped, and the bigger dogs just chilled, but they'd only do it for a few minutes. Then they'd get over it. But something was different this time, as even the bigger dogs were barking non-stop. My dad appeared in his room and mentioned to us that he noticed the dog's incessant barking and was going to check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off in my head, as I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother was asked to investigate with him and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad ventured out into the garden with my brother in tow when my dad had noticed that the dogs were all grouped, growling and going nuts in a dark corner behind our swimming pool. The best way I can describe it is our garden beyond our pool has a slight decline. We have a few steps leading down the hill to the bottom end of our garden. We usually have a lamp that lights up, but my dad noticed the lamp seemed to be off, which confused him because he could have sworn it worked the other night. Either way, my dad said he got this gut-wrenching feeling because of this, and because of how out of character the dogs were acting. He called after them, and they'd usually come running, but tonight they all just looked at him. Then he turned back around. The dogs continued going crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother to not come with him because of this off feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dog seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out of view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched to the steps as he put 2 and 2 together. It was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet and avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple and immediately knew it was a gun. Out of the darkness stepped 4 other men in balaclavas, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive and asked him where my brother was. that he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. Why? At that moment, my dad said something came over him, and before he knew what he was saying, he responded with, "He's gone inside to press the panic button." As he said it, he saw how all of these guys started to panic. They began speaking in Zulu, assuming my dad couldn't understand it, as it's not common for white people to speak it. But my dad had actually grown up on a farm where he learnt it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy holding the gun said in Zulu, "Crap, the cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this guy, grab what we can and go." The others seemed apprehensive, and a smaller guy seemed really on edge and continued to say how he can't go back to jail again and that they need to just get the hell out of there before the cops show up, which will be any minute. He was panicked. My dad then fed on this guy's fear. My dad then interrupted them, speaking in English, pretending not to understand what they were saying, and said that we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area, and since my brother pushed the panic button so long ago, they'll probably be here any second, and that did it. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them. The smaller guy started freaking out, all of the other guys saying that they needed to leave there ASAP or they'd be caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves, their plans slowly turning to crap, as a third guy had put it. The aggressive one pointing the gun to my dad's head slowly lowered it, and they started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto the crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart into the house. As luck would have it, my dad ran into the veranda door. My oblivious brother was heading out with a torch. My dad scooped him up under his arm and mid-ran and sprinted to the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, I know, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quickly as possible without even thinking. Anne and I were oblivious to everything when my dad rushed through the bedroom doors, slammed it shut, and told us to get to the attic. "There are 5 guys outside with guns and they're here to hurt us. Get upstairs now." My heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs with Anne right behind. My mum ran out the bath in a towel not too far behind. We sat there in the dark and silence. I swear you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just waiting to hear something below us. My mum cursed, saying she didn't have a phone, and neither did my dad. But in my hand was a brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than now, right? My mum dials the police, and I kid you not, they asked where we live. We explained, and they told us it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry, click, line goes dead. We're now not only crapping ourselves, we're flabbergasted too. My mum starts cursing like a sailor again, and that's when he realizes he never closed the veranda door. And what about Ellie and Vince, who are in their rooms blissfully unaware of the danger they're in? He gets his firearm from the safe in the attic and tells us whatever we hear to not go downstairs, to stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad to not leave us, but he tells us he has to go and get Ellie and Vince before something bad happens to them. Now there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. Anne is understandably in hysterics, because she's also fearing for her mother downstairs. My dad disappears as the air is thick with tension. We can hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that the men were still on the property. My mum then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say they'll be over in 10 to 15 minutes, and to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all sit in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating the men are in our home. But there was just silence. The only sound we hear were the dog barks outside. After what seems like hours, but was most likely mere minutes, we heard stomping coming up the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was my dad with Ellie and Vince. Luckily it was. We all hid for a while, no one dared to speak. The dogs had seemed to calm down considerably, but were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang and my dad told us to just wait while he checked it. It was the security company, and sure enough, he opened up and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up, my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there were actually 7 pairs of footprints, and that these guys bent the spikes on our walls and just climbed over. We got an electric fence shortly after, so there must have been 2 other guys hiding in the shadows that my dad hadn't seen, which is actually creepy in its own right. South Africa's violent crime is quite bad, and it's sickeningly common for torture and rape to happen during home invasions. I was obviously so young at the time. I didn't know the horrors of the world and was just scared of my family getting hurt. Now that I'm older, just the thought of 4 women being in the house and my mum being in nothing but a towel gives me chills. The cops said the fact that there were so many guys, as opposed to 1 to 3, indicates they probably had seriously sinister intentions. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button, and so glad my dad understands Zulu and could manipulate the situation to benefit all of us. Lastly, my family will forever be in debt of our good boys and girls that warned us that night. A terrifying and life-changing outcome would have 100% happened that night, had it not been for our incredible dogs. From that day onwards, my dad always gave them leftover rice or meat with their dinner. I'm sure there's a special place in heaven for my dogs. Rest in peace, Impy, Shoto, Dash, Fudge, Wrinkles, and Pikachu. This story happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anymore because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation without really understanding it. How your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic is something different. But you guys seem to get it. So here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time of 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habit for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I'd never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began to hang up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day before work. My front door opened and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I was happy and called out to him, "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something being wrong as it crawled up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out into the living room/kitchen area. Standing on the other side of the island was a complete stranger. He was male, I'd estimate 50s, and was just standing there staring. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if maybe he'd walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave, but he just continued to stare. I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at this stranger in my house. I stood tall, puffed out my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a loud, clear voice telling him to get out my apartment and that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't spoken. He then began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me this person was dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forwards towards the only other device I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back towards the bathroom because it was the only place I could go in and put 2 locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it trying to open it. I ran into the closet, locked that too, opened my computer, and got onto Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell him there was an intruder in our apartment. He got the messages within a minute and assured me that he had dispatch on the phone and was leaving work himself and was trying to get to me as quick as he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door then opened, and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and began trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted. But all I could tell you is that I was frozen with fear, with shock. But I didn't scream or cry, or searched for a weapon in the dark. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just knelt in the closet and waited for death, because I knew that was what was going to happen. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely, if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come for help. Surely there was something very heavy in my closet that I could have used to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would have hurt if I swung it at someone. Why did I do nothing? Well, I really have no answer for that. Other than when you're in the heat of the moment and feeling that fear, these thoughts don't come to the forefront of your mind, as some of you would not believe. But the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps going back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering my drawers and refrigerator, and cabinets being flown open, things being torn out of them. I continued to sit in the closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that the threat of death was inevitable. I felt awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mum, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort, and to tell her how much I loved her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through, knowing her daughter was in danger, and there was nothing that she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to reply. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I loved them as well, to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder began messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words I couldn't distinguish. I remember hoping the police would get to the apartment before my husband, and that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked out towards the living room kitchen area where the front door was located, and I opened the door and started darting from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling and at times yelling, but never really put much up resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear mostly for my husband. Eventually the police found the apartment. It took them 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the officers arriving, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just always seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my things back from the man, took him out of the apartment, and I numbly went through the process of filing a police report telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remembered feeling like he was being insensitive at the time, or blaming me for what happened, but later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he'd seen this situation end very differently for other women. Within half an hour, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude on my space for years. If it happened once, it could happen again. If this or something similar has happened to you, and you're still struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the laying awake listening for sounds of forced entries, the nightmares, the constant checking and rechecking your logs, this is what eventually helped me. My husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We chose a safe town with nice apartment complexes, chose a third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime in the neighborhood, and I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in the same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often works nights now, and I simply couldn't continue being so terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my door. I knew I would likely freeze up again. So I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself and started taking classes. At first I was quiet and held back. My instructor, who is both incredibly kind and insightful, slowly built up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes, and he worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. I've been training for years now, and it's made an unbelievable difference in my life. I'm now confident and strong, and I'm worthy of living and protecting myself in my home. I'm no longer ashamed of how I handled this situation. I recognize the solution might not be for everyone. Everyone else's experience is valid, and how you decide to cope with your own story is your choice. But this happened to me, and that is what worked. I can only offer my experience onto all of you. Remember to lock your doors out there, people, and stay safe. I lived alone in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for about 3 years with no incidents. Well, I mean, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me, so no incidents, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I find myself standing or pacing a lot. Well, on this particular night at about 2 a.m., I was pacing while reading a textbook to prepare for an upcoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for a little and just stood near my front door to read. That's when I heard my doorknob turn. For some reason, though, I nearly crapped myself, and I was able to calmly look down at my deadbolt to double-check that it was locked, which it was. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was confusing. I am neither superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I am also stupid, so my first thought was that it was a ghost trying to break into my house. Thankfully, that thought gave way to a more logical thought of, maybe they're going around the back. So I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked, and it was. But then my front doorknob turned again. I tiptoed around to the front door. At this point, my heart is pounding. My dog, a big protective teddy bear, is looking at me with major concern in his eyes. I look at the front peephole again, but there's still no one there. That's when I hear a small knock on my door as I'm looking through the peephole. Then a small child's voice says, "Let me in." There's silence. "Let me in." I'm still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand, trying to make my breathing quieter. Through the peephole, I see a small 3-year-oldish girl walk to the edge of my porch and look into my bushes. She then nods and says, "Okay," in what I thought was supposed to be a whisper. She walks closer to the door again, and I lose sight of her from the peephole. She tries the handle again and knocks and says, "Please help me." My uncle is a cop, so I heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacks, so I'm pretty sure that's what was happening. I wasn't sure how to handle the situation, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, I think someone's trying to break into my apartment. Yeah, this is my address. Yeah, I'll stay on the line." I then saw a shadow emerge from my bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid and ran off. There were 2 people and the kid. To the people who tried to break into my apartment to rob and or kill me, let's not meet again. This story takes place around 7 years ago. I was just getting home from high school on the bus. I made it home and saw that my mum wasn't there, since my dad was at work and my brother didn't get out of school until later. I was the only one home. I put my backpack down and go to untie my shoes, and some dude walks out from a hallway. I go into Occam's razor mode and assume this is some sort of handyman/repair guy, since we had moved in recently and had been getting a lot of home repairs done to fix the half-assed DIY electrical and plumbing and paint jobs left behind by the previous owners. Additionally, he's wearing some sort of tool belt, and it fits the general repairman look. My mum is usually around when we have people working the house, so I assumed that my mum must have left not long ago and would be back soon. I nonchalantly tell the guy that my mum should be back soon, and he mumbles something like, "Thanks," and leaves out the front door to what I assume is a repair truck. It's at this point that I text my mum asking when she'll be back, and who's the dude in the house. She asks if I'm joking, and it's only at this point that I come to realize that I was sitting on the couch, chatting with the dude burgling our house. At this point the guy was long gone, and luckily my mum was only a few minutes away at a store down the road. She gets back and we called the police. They take a look around and nothing was actually missing. Nothing ever really came of it. I'm honestly just glad it went down the way it did, since I only knew what happened once it was already over. This guy had just put himself between me and the front door, and I'm really not sure what freaked out me would have done, fight or flight. I can't imagine what the guy was thinking when I basically just let him walk out. I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me when I was 17. This story still freaks me out so much, I don't even know what happened that day, and would like your opinion of it. It was November, and my friend Jacob was going to have his 17th birthday. Me being a good friend, I proposed to him to sleep at my house and then go for a walk the next day with friends in the forest. He accepts. Everything goes well. He sleeps at my place, and the next day we leave with friends for 2 hours of road. For the forest is a bit far, and at the time I lived in the city centre. After the road I realised that I forgot the keys to my house at home, and therefore the door to my house was not locked. But hey, I tell myself that we're in a town and that few people frequent the suburbs to fly. The day is going well, and it's time to go home. I was stressed about knowing if my house had been robbed. Then in the end I said to myself that there was very little chance. My friend Jacob wanted to spend more time with me before I left for my studies, and so he did. So I accepted that he sleep over. We walk in and see my house is intact, but it was nice and wide open, so I walked around the house and noticed something. The cellar door, which is never open, was open, and there was white paper on the floor. I quickly realized that I had to call the police and check if there was anything in there, or anyone. And Jacob decided to shout that if the stranger didn't come out, the police would take care of it. I was paralyzed with fear and feared that the stranger was coming. Bad news. The stranger, who was in the cellar, cried out, "You're not at home. Get out of here or I'll lock you up." Jacob got scared and asked me to come and see if there were police there. Fortunately, there were. They arrived, came in and got him out. They found kitchen knives, an axe, iron chains and a board, and there was also a white sheet on which was written, "Behind you." I still don't understand everything that the police told me, but it turns out that the individual ran away from an asylum. I'm 25 now, and always check if I have my key with me or not. Don't leave your doors unlocked. This happened when I was 16 in high school. My friend Lisa had a lot of money. Her house was huge. She lived right next to our high school. So every time we had a break or something like that, the three of us would just go chill there, and we'd have an awful lot of sleepovers. It was this huge house that rich people lived in, so it was awesome to stay. Well, one night, We decided to spend the night. It was the three of us, Lisa, Zoe, and Lisa's little sister Anna. Their mum was actually gone for the night, so we put on some PJs and watched a scary movie. Anna went to bed before us three, and we just stayed in the living room watching TV. At one point, the alarm goes off. This happens, so Lisa just goes to turn it off and that was it. But 10 minutes later it goes off again, and again. That's when it got frightening, because it's not supposed to. The alarm only goes off when humans come by, because the house was located in the middle of the forest. So we all knew sometimes animals would approach the house, as it happened before, but it was calibrated for humans, and had already rung before. We got a bit nervous, so we went upstairs, opened the windows to look out into the garden and around the house, but we saw nothing. We even went onto the balcony in the middle of the night and couldn't see a damn thing. I was alone on the balcony at some point, and the alarm went off again, and the automatic lights around the swimming pool turned on. That meant something was around the pool, and I was just above it. I got so scared I was on my knees and stayed there until my friend deactivated the alarm and the lights, and I ran inside the house. At this point, we were really scared, and I started thinking about what it could be. If it has to be any human, all our lights were on, and they knew we were home. We turned all the lights off and ran downstairs to hide. As we were standing there, huddled together in the darkness, we see flashlights move through the garden. There are certainly people here now, and we're all very jittery and on edge, being children here alone with no adult supervision. We see flashlights come and go. It feels like hours, and at one point, two of my friends run upstairs in fear. Right as we're waiting huddled together, we see a flashlight literally pass by our face, and we're 100% sure we were seen. We're just there paralyzed in fear, not knowing what these people are going to do to us, as there was certainly more than one. When we feel brave, we get the confidence and run all the way around the house. When we're at the front door, we hear people walking by, banging on it. As you can imagine, being children, we're absolutely terrified and have no idea what to do. It was in none of our instincts to call the police, and we just hear them going around the house, knowing full well we're in here. The four of us huddle together and wait until they finally leave. The next day when her mum gets back, she scolds us for not calling the police, but we were scared. I'm so glad that they didn't manage to get in and rob anything or do God knows what to us. We were so scared that they would come back, we never slept over again. My fiancé and I are soon to be married, and are remodeling an old family home. We started working on the house about 2 to 3 months ago. My fiancé bought a bunch of tools to use on the house to renovate. The house itself has been sitting with nobody in it for over a year. Keep in mind it's located in a fairly rural area. A few houses and trailers here, but there's not too much traffic. We have a rodent problem, and have been setting traps to catch them. 3 weeks ago, my fiancé went to check the traps. We had a rat that was alive. Long story short, he didn't want to take care of it, so he left. I got to work at 9 p.m, went over to the house and took care of the rat. It was raining, and my mum and brother came with me. I went to the back door and it was wide open and water was blowing into the house. I was pissed. I thought my fiancé had left the door open, so I closed it and finished my business there. When I asked him why he left the door open, he claimed he didn't. I called BS and left it at that. Didn't occur to me that someone had probably made their way in. Well, fast forward a little while. My fiancé went to our house to throw a bunch of trash and stuff into the dumpster. We then went inside. We immediately noticed that some of our things were missing, drills, sanders, and that they'd been stolen. We call my mother-in-law and tell her, and she says to make a police report. What scares me so much about this is that everything began with the rat trap incident. Somebody had been scoping us out. I would go to our house by myself on many occasions and would always have the creeps and felt watched. My little brother even remarked that he felt watched there and asked if we were sure nobody was in there while we were. I noticed today that I was there alone, and my dog was acting very nervous and suspicious. She wasn't running and playing as she usually did, and didn't want me to go to the backyard or wooded area. I'm glad I trusted her and my gut. I don't know if the thieves were there, but I'm glad I didn't find out. We actually installed cameras and caught a car pulling in like it was scoping out the place. The people inside never got out, but they left. We asked a few of my fiance's family members about it, and that was to our detriment. One of them went and spread the word that we have cameras, and somebody in our neighborhood who owned the vehicle that we caught on camera slipped up and said that they already knew things had been stolen, which to me was basically a confession, because we hadn't told anyone about the robbery until the incident with the car was caught on camera. So now more people than necessary know we probably won't catch the person who did it. We still turn the footage into the police though. Maybe they can dig up something. I'm going to share with you the single most terrifying and funny thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. In order to understand this story, you're going to need a little bit of context. The first is that the house in which I share with a few friends, or at least did at the time, was one with a basement. None of them used the basement much, as it was dirt floor, but this brings me on to my second piece of information. I, or at least used to, really enjoyed playing Dungeons and Dragons. We had a party and everything set up, and were well into our campaign. Now, the story goes like so. It was a November evening, dark outside, quite early on in the upper hemisphere. It must have been about 6 p.m. or something. It was already dark, and my friends had come over this Saturday night to drink and play Dungeons and Dragons. Well, tonight it was being hosted at my house, and in collaboration with the Dungeon Master, we had actually organized the basement to make it spooky, in theme for the part of the adventure that we were about to embark on. This involved putting up creepy monk chanting music in the background, as it was part of the game, along with snacks, turning off all the lights, and putting down candles to make it seem super creepy. We were only supposed to have this particular part. The candles and everything were just for when everyone arrived to really get into the mood, and the chanting, and we were obviously going to turn all the lights on when we started playing the game. We had just finished doing some final setups, and were literally lighting the last candles, when we heard a very loud thump upstairs. At first, we looked at each other, assuming some members of our party had arrived early, but seeing as it was around 6 and we told them to get here for 8, we were both quite confused. We look at each other when we hear banging continuing, and at this point, it sounds like they broke the door down. They hadn't actually, they used a crowbar. Well, when we realize and hear the sound of multiple footsteps that people had just entered my home without my permission, we quickly hide underneath the basement stairs. At this point, we hear people running around upstairs. We're both terrified, grab our cell phones and dial 911, and in hushed tones tell the operators what's going on, and that there are people upstairs in the house. That's when we hear someone grab the door to the basement and open it wide, with force. When they take a few steps down, that's where we hear them stop. We look around and take in the scene ourselves. Darkness, candles melting, weird monk chanting music, and what made to others appear as some kind of ritual waiting to happen. It was at this moment, call it stupidity or courage, I don't know, that something within me swelled, and I got up and began chanting along to the monk music, as it was on loop and I had heard it a lot that day, so I knew what they were saying. With a blanket that was just next to me on the basement, I draped it over my head like a fool and began approaching the stairs, chanting. I kid you not, the home invader screamed like a little girl, and the other guy jumped in horror, who was only a few steps behind him on the stairs. They took one good look at me and ran straight out of the house. When the police arrived, we were informed that they probably scoped the house and assumed that because my friend had taken me and I'd left my car with my girlfriend, that's why they thought it would be a good time to break in. We obviously had to cancel D&D that night, and even though nothing was stolen, it still leaves me with an overwhelming fear and sense of insecurity. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, you can leave me the comments down below to let me know. I really appreciate all your comments and feedback, so go ahead and type them out. If you'd like more stories like this, be sure to let me know in the usual way, and a huge thank you as always to my members and patrons who donate a little bit of money every month to help keep the channel running. It is tremendously appreciated, and you get your name in the credits at the end, as well as other cool stuff. So thank you guys. But for now, I think that's a wrap. Hopefully see you Friday for even more fresh content, but until then, stay awesome, and I will see you in the next one.